Hello, my gorgeous friends of Webflow. It's your friendly neighborhood Francesco from Subasaido here. Have you ever wanted to create a Webflow experience where input fields sync magically in real time? Imagine typing your name or a message and instantly seeing it appear somewhere else on the page. Today, I'll show you exactly how to do that with Finsweet's Mirror Input Values solution. It's simple, it's powerful, and best of all, it's really fun to implement. By the end of this video, you'll not only know how to set it up, but you'll also see some practical use cases that can elevate your Webflow projects. So, stick around, and if you're interested in learning more about Webflow forms, check out our course on Supasaido Academy. Link is in the description down below. But now, let's dive in. First, let's talk about what this solution is and why it's awesome. The Mirror Input Values solution by Finsweet allows you to sync the value of one input field to another input field in real time. It uses a simple attribute setup and, of course, no coding expertise is needed. Here are a few ways this feature can come in handy. 1. Automatically copying a user's name into a personalized greeting. 2. Creating a live preview of dynamic content like messages or cards. 3. Syncing fields in long forms to reduce errors. Does this make sense? If not, don't worry, because now we will move on some practical examples to see how this works in action. One for each of the points I just highlighted. Let's start with a simple example, a dynamic personalized greeting. Say you want users to type their name in a sign-up form and see a friendly message appear. Here's how we do it. The setup is very easy. We have a form block here with a plain text input field and then a password input field. And as the users type into the plain text input field, we want the same text to be mirrored to appear in the message above right after hello. What's the setup? Well, based on Finsweet's documentation, this plain text input field will work as our trigger. And so, based on Finsweet's documentation, we need to go to the element settings panel and we need to add a custom attribute with a name of fs-mirror input-element with a value of trigger, because again, this text input field will act as our trigger. Then here we have the message. The most important thing about this message is that we're not using a brand new form block element to just put a text input field that we don't even want to be editable by the user. We are using Webflow custom element, this one. But how can we turn a Webflow custom element into a text input field that we can use as the target input field for our solution? Well, we simply have to go to the element settings panel and then under input settings here, for the tag property, we have to type input, and this will turn the custom element into an input field. Then to turn it into a text input field, we need to add an attribute, the type attribute with a value of text. Then, because we don't really want this text input field to be interactable, because we just want it to show what the user is typing here in the username text input field, we can also add this read-only attribute, no need to specify a value. And then again, following Finsweet's documentation, we have to add once again this fs-mirror input-element attribute, but this time with a value of target, because this will be the target text input field. And now if we want to test our solution, of course, we have to publish our project and then inspect the live link. So let's go to the live page. And here in the username input field, we can start typing Francesco. And we can see the name appearing here as the user as I'm typing inside the username text input field. And of course, I can write something else and everything works perfectly fine. Now, a tiny little thing. As you can see here, if the username text input field is empty, this exclamation mark is right after the word hello. But as soon as I start typing, we can see that a blank space gets added right after the word hello. How does it work? Well, with a bit of custom code. You can take a look at that after cloning the project, but if you want to know more about that, add a comment to this video and maybe I can record a small video to talk about that. But now let's go back to our Webflow project and let's talk about the second example. Example number 2 is about building a real-time message preview. This is great for things like email templates or personalized cards like the one that we have here. And here's the process. Once again, the setup is quite simple, I would say. We have a simple form with a text input field for the name and a text area input field for the message. And basically, this time we have two different triggers, the name input field and the message input field. And we want that as the user types here in the name input field, we want that name to appear here at the top right corner of our postcard. And as the user types the message in this text area, we want the message to appear here inside the postcard. So we said that now we have two different triggers. And so by following Finsweet's documentation, we need to add to each of them the fs-mirror input-element attribute, same thing as we did for example number 1. But this time, the value will be trigger-2 because we've already used the value trigger for the example number 1. And because the text area is a different trigger, the value of this fs mirror input element needs to be different. And this time it will be trigger-3. Now, what about the postcard? Apart from the fact that all the elements, apart from this card image, have been kind of absolutely positioned somewhere inside the postcard, is that once again we are using Webflow's custom element. And for the plain text input field, we have done the same thing we did for example 1. So inside the element settings panel, under input settings, we are setting the tag property to input to turn the custom element into an input field. And we are also adding the type attribute with a value of text to say that this is a text input field. And once again, we are also using the read-only attribute with no value because we don't really want it to be editable. And by following Finsweet documentation, because this will be the trigger for our name input field, we need to add the fs-mirror input-element attribute once again, but with a value of target-2. And one thing to remember is that what comes after the dash here, the number, needs to match the one that we have using for the trigger. So if we want this to be the target for our name input field, and the name input field is using the trigger-2 value, the corresponding target has to use a value of target-2. And the same goes for this text area here. Once again, we're using a Webflow custom element, but to say that this is a text area, here under the element settings drop-down, we need to assign a text area value to the tag property. Once again, we are using the read-only attribute because we don't want this element to be editable. And finally, we are assigning this text area the fs-mirror input-element attribute, this time with the value of target-3, because this is the target element for the message text area. And the message text area is using Finsweet's attribute with a value of trigger-3. Now, to see this in action, once again, we need to publish our project after setting it up. Let's go to the live page. And as soon as I start typing something here in the name input field, we can see the same value, the same text appearing here, as we might expect, in the top right corner of our postcard. And here we can write a message and say, hello, I'm really happy to send you this message. And yeah, that's it for example 2. And now let's move to the last one of our use cases. Example number 3 tackles duplicate fields, like an address confirmation in a checkout form. And here's how. We have a simple form once again, and we have to imagine that this is a very long form with a lot of fields that we have to fill in to complete the checkout process and purchase our product. And so let's say that at a certain point, we also, of course, need to share our shipping address. And after that, we also have to specify the address for the invoice. And let's say that we want to give our user the ability to start typing something here in the shipping address and have this value be mirrored inside the corresponding field of the invoicing address. And then, of course, give them the ability to change it afterwards if the invoice address is different from the shipping address. So how can we do that? And by the way, this time we're not only using text input fields, but we are also using a select input field, because as specified by Finsweet, we can use this input value solution with text input fields, text areas, select input fields, radio buttons, and checkboxes. And the structure of this specific example is very, very simple. This text input field and this select input field, so the one under the shipping address section, will act as our triggers, while the text input field and the select input field inside the invoicing address section will be our targets. So let's select the text input field under the shipping address section. What we need to do this time is simply adding the usual fs-mirror input-element attribute, this time with the value trigger-4, because we already used simple trigger value, trigger-2, and trigger-3 in examples 1 and 2. And because the text input field under the invoicing address section is the corresponding target, to this text field, we need to add the same attribute, of course, but with a value of target-4, by once again making sure that the number appearing at the end of the value of the attribute is the same for both the target and the corresponding input. And finally, I guess you already know what we are going to do. We just have to select our select input field and add the same old attribute fs-mirror input-element with a value this time of trigger-5. And guess what? To the select input field under the invoicing address section, we have to use the exact same attribute, but with a value of target-5. And now let's see what happens after publishing our website. Let's inspect the live page. Of course, as soon as I start typing something here, the same value appears under the invoicing address section. And if I pick a value for the prefecture, this value will be mirrored to the select input field under the invoicing address section. But because invoicing address and shipping address might be different, of course, the user will have anyway the ability to write something else here. And of course, change the value of the prefecture. And yeah, that's it. Now, before we wrap up and before you start mirroring all the inputs, here are some best practices to keep in mind. First, use this feature selectively, only where it enhances the user experience. This is very, very important. This should be our main goal when building the site. User experience, we need to do something that is really beneficial to our users. Number two, we have to clearly label linked fields to avoid confusion. And what does this mean? This is exactly what we did in example number 3. Because you see here under shipping address, we have street, we have prefecture, and under invoicing address, the target fields have the exact same labels as the trigger fields. We have street and we have prefecture. By doing that, the user won't get lost. And now let's wrap this up. And that's it. Today we explored Finsweet's mirror input value solution, look at how to set it up, and saw 3 practical examples in action. Now it's your turn. Try implementing this in your Webflow projects and let me know in the comments how it worked for you. Also, a link to the clonable for this project is available in the description down below. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more Webflow tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Matane!